Excellent. Thank you very much for your warm welcome. Thanks again. All right, so today we are going to be talking about social media strategy. And at Illinois State University, the other ISU, by the way, I teach a number of courses involving communication technologies and particularly social media. And so what we'll do today is I will give you a condensed version of the class that I teach over an entire semester. So you'll get the primary points of this class. And I hope that you're able to take it away and learn more about your own processes as you think about planning for your own social media work in the future. So to begin with, here's the overview of the talk this afternoon. First, we're going to discuss how you might align social media planning with your organizational goals. So goals are going to be very important for what you do, and defining them is an important process. Second, we'll examine how social media analytics, and really briefly, how those analytics can help provide you your planning with research and feedback. Third, we'll examine a couple of tools that help create and publish content. We won't have time to look into them all, but I'll at least name several that I have found to be very useful. And then finally, I'll just talk a little bit about how my students have been getting involved in what we call client projects and how those have really helped facilitate learning over time. So really quickly, I would like to talk about why I'm here. One of the things that we've noticed in the United States is that there's been increasing research that says our students, especially those in media, do not really effectively know how to use social media to get their points across. So these students, again, are having problems. They know how to create good journalism, but they don't know how to use social media to spread that journalism widely. And two studies just out of a recent publication say that university newspapers do not follow best practices. And another one says that student TV stations using social media have a lot of difficulty sustaining a constant presence in those spaces. And those studies continued, and they really asked, why is this the case? And they found really four different reasons. And the first really is that in these organizations, so student television stations, student newspapers, there's a lot of turnover, right? Students are there for maybe a year or two and then they leave. And so you don't have anyone to continue the work. Second of all, we've been finding that social media are really just viewed as an extension of the broadcast, right? Like if you create a news story or a video, all you need to do is just post it to social media and that's it. That's all you need to do, right? And so people do not see it as an ability to further engage your audiences. The third thing that we find is that, and some of you may have experienced this too, is that social media are not always run by journalism or media students. The people who should be trained in strategy aren't always the ones who are running those accounts. And then finally, journalism is a busy world. And many journalists are just far too busy to sit down and take the time to create coherent strategy. So one of the books that I use at Illinois State University talks about really what's necessary to build a superior social media strategy. And the author, Philip Clampett, I'll show you a picture of his book at the end, he says that based on an assessment of the ever-changing competitive landscape, superior strategists make big picture choices and coordinate these choices into a coherent path forward, resulting in an orchestrated set of tactics. And in short, what he means here is that social media require planning, and strategy requires a lot of planning. So here are the 6 steps, the 6 things you need to be thinking about for an effective social media plan. And as we'll talk about first and foremost, identifying goals will be extremely important. Many people forget the idea that you need to have goals. So many are focused on the idea that you just need to post and that's it. And as we'll talk about, there are different kinds of goals, and that these goals coordinate, that they talk to each other, and that they need each other. The second point that we will cover is you need to be able to assess the different channels you have available. In many cases, Facebook might be the channel that you need to use, but there may be others available based on your audience, and so you need to be able to effectively assess what those are. Third, selecting content may feel easy, especially if you are an aspiring journalist. You might feel like all you need to do is publish your story. But we also need to be thinking about the different forms, so things like text and video, as well as maybe links and images, as well as the genre, which we'll cover some of those in a moment as well. So the two are very different things, and when put together, they can be used in much more effective ways. Fourth of all, we're going to talk about your own networks. That is, who you are connected with and what you want those connections to look like. And so you have to ask questions about whether or not those connections and relationships are important and appropriate for your overall strategy. And then fifth of all, we'll talk about analytics very briefly, but be thinking about ways that you will assess how well you are doing, and also maybe to use analytics to do a little bit of research beyond your own social media content. And then finally, we'll talk about policy. And policy really is the rules that you will apply that will make sure that your plans get carried out. All right, so let's begin developing some strategy. Now, I'll apologize a little bit here. I don't use a lot of images. I've got a lot of text. But when we do get to examples, I will have some pictures, and it will be a little bit more fun than just reading. So let's start with this idea of aligning goals. Everyone has two kinds of goals when it comes to social media communication. One is a business goal, right? Often cases you are either trying to monetize or at least trying to get something done, right? That would be a business goal. And there are also communication goals. And those are goals that are related to your ability to, again, communicate with others. And what we have is a relationship between the two. And the way to think about it is this. Every business goal needs to have a communication goal. And second, any communication goal that you have has to support some sort of business goal. So let's look at two examples here. A good example of a business goal might be someone saying, I want more awareness, maybe of my news service, or maybe of my website, or a product that I have. And a communication goal that helps support that would be something maybe as simple as, I just need to post more, right? I have a goal of posting more, which will help support this idea of more awareness. Another example would be this idea that I want to be more authentic, right? I want more people to think I'm doing a good job and that what I have to offer is maybe a good service. And maybe one of the ways to accomplish that goal, or at least to work in a communication goal, would be to do some diversification of the things that you produce. So it doesn't feel like you are a robot producing the same content over and over and over. So once you have goals, once you've established what those goals are, and usually in my classes I say, take out a pen and write for 15 minutes, what are your goals? We won't have time for that tonight. But the next thing we'll do is evaluate the channels that you have available. And again, by channels, what we mean are the different social media platforms. So Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Georgians don't use Twitter, never mind. Trying to think of some of the others here. But here are the questions that you should ask. First, is your target audience likely to be on this platform, right? I mean, that should be a very obvious kind of thing to think about. But many people forget that just because you use it doesn't mean that your target audience doesn't. So that's something that you need to make sure that they are there. Second, and this is actually a very important follow-up point, if you want to use a platform, that's great, but do you have the ability to use it? For example, I might really like YouTube. I might say, I want to be on YouTube, but do I have the ability to create video? Is that something I can do? So those are two things we need to think about. And do I have the ability to master the platform? Can I get good at it? Do I have resources to help me get good at it? And then third of all, do I have the budget, the equipment, and the people? And if I wanted to be a YouTube star, I would need to have a very good video camera. I would need a lighting kit. I would need to have people that could help me upload video in a timely manner. And then finally, can I be active on that site? When I'm thinking about a channel, can I be frequently in Facebook, logging in and checking everything? Or is it something that maybe I just check every once in a while and just see how people are talking about my news service or my product or whatever else it might be? So can I just watch what they're doing and not be as active? One of the tools I provide students, this comes again from one of our social media strategy books. It's described as a channel evaluation grid or a platform evaluation grid. And so what students do is I have them go through this as they're deciding what social media platforms they'll work with and to check each box. So you might think of it as a way to ask some questions of yourself. So you can see I've listed some sample platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and so on. And I say, will my audience be using the platform? Is it going to be my primary audience, or would it be a secondary audience? So I'm going to check those boxes. Second of all, do I have that ability to master the platform, right? Do I want to, and do I have the ability to? Do I check those boxes? Do I have the resources, right? The equipment for a YouTube star? Do I have the equipment? Do I have the cameras? Do I have people to help me if I need it? Do I have people to help manage my Facebook page? If there's a budget, if I need to do advertising, do I have the money to make that happen? And then finally, I can ask myself, can I be active in this space, or am I going to end up being passive? Or I might look at this and say, VK, nobody in the US uses VK. No, I can ignore it, right? So again, that's a great way to use this grid. And by the time you're done with something like this, you should have a very good sense of which channels will be the most effective for you. So when it comes to content, one of the most important things I tell my students is don't confuse what's the difference called form and genre, right? And here's the way to think about it. Form is the delivery medium, such as a video or text or images, whereas genre is the style and the conventions that are used within. So actually I have an example up here from the Myth Detector Facebook page. And the example I have here is actually the form is video, right? And the genre, it's actually a very interesting genre. It is a how-to video. And the how-to video is kind of an argument that says, here is how to create a disinformation campaign. So they break it down to show you how people are attempting to inject you with propaganda, right? So again, the form is video, and the genre would be a how-to. So here's a quick list, again, thinking about form. Here are maybe the 4 primary types of posts that you can create, right? Pictures, text, videos, graphics, those are all different ways to think about form. And then genre gets much more complex. And if I had 2 hours, I would walk through examples of each of these, but I don't. But really quickly, again, if you're a journalist, obviously you'll be posting news and information, right? That's definitely a genre. You might be talking about people, right? Doing biographies or interviews. You might think about events, whether that's covering an event or promoting an event. Calls to action are moments where you're saying, hey, we need to do something, right? Stand up, come to an event, do something. Amusements are things that are just funny, things that are entertaining. Right? And you'd be surprised, news services occasionally will do this, right? We call them human interest pieces, or they might look at some funny news, right? And that's definitely a genre. And as I just mentioned, how-tos, instructional videos, that is certainly a genre that's out there. And then 2 other things you can include are posts that are inspirational, that inspire you to do different things or to feel better about yourself. And then last and not least, with the commentary and opinion, right? So again, these are all ideas for different kinds of content that you can produce. And you can strategically think about potentially diversifying these, so using different ones throughout your overall social media platform. So just like the tool I showed earlier in terms of evaluating your channels, you can also evaluate the content, right? And so right here I have a chart that thinks about both the form and the genre. And it looks like I have an extra one there called indices, don't worry about it. But you can see right there, I've listed them out, and you can go through and say, like, use a checkbox. Do I have content that is, using text? What kind will I use? So text that is a call to action, right? So again, this helps you think about different kinds of content that you can be creating, even before you start writing that story. And to be thinking about diversifying the set of content that you create. Now, in addition to saying what you should do, it's also fun to talk about what you shouldn't do. And so there's an article from 2013 by an author named Steph Parker, who said, here are the 7 deadly sins of social media that you should avoid. And rather than reading through the entire list, what we'll do is just walk through them, and I'll give you an example of each, so you can think of maybe ways to be more creative than falling into these deadly sins. So let's start with one here called misappropriation. Some of you may have heard of this term called trend jacking or news jacking. And the basic idea is that you see something that is trending in social media, maybe a hashtag or a news story, and you say, hey, I want to be part of that. Do you all know who Baby Yoda is? Yes, okay, Baby Yoda would be a good example right there, right? Everybody's posting about Baby Yoda. That would be an example of if you wanted to post too. That would be newsjacking or maybe trendjacking. And companies and sometimes even news outlets can do this very poorly. So this example right here is a pizza company in the United States, and they decided to use a hashtag called Why I Stayed. And here's the background there, is that Why I Stayed refers to domestic abuse. So people were saying, why I stayed with this person who's hurting me, and they would give an example. And so this pizza company basically used domestic violence to say, buy our pizza, right? So incredible failure, right? So you have to be very careful when you decide to be parts of these kinds of trends or newsjacking moments. The second deadly sin is abandonment, which in other words is just creating an account but never doing anything with it. And I have to laugh because one of the most powerful companies on the planet, the most recognizable brands, is Apple. And this is their Twitter account with 0 tweets. They don't even follow anybody, and it's just there, right? And so it's doing nothing, right? And that's their own choice. I think they're probably thinking about why that is, but it's abandoned, right? It's just doing nothing. So you have to be cautious about doing that because you're not Apple. You don't have the power to just do that and leave it there. You need to be active in the space. The third sin is manipulation. And some of you may have seen these kinds of posts before, especially on Facebook. And they will pop up and they will say, hey, it's a really weird image, press like or type 1 to see more, right? Or to see what happens next. And then you type and nothing happens, right? And then if you're confused and you tag your friends and you say, did it work for you, right? And everybody does that, and within about half an hour it has 500,000 likes or 500,000 comments, right? And the reason these pages do that is to get extra attention, right? Suddenly they will start showing up in people's feeds because they're trending. And this is extremely disingenuous, right? And just from this example alone, you should get why that's a terrible idea, right? It's disingenuous, it shouldn't be part of your strategy unless your entire goal is just to make people angry with you. Now, ignorance is another deadly sin here, and there are a couple of ways that this might operate. I think first, many people don't realize that there are unstated rules about things like contests or giveaways in social media, and different platforms have different rules. And it's up to you to make sure that you read them before you do anything that could get you in trouble. And so make sure you always read those platforms. You can't at some point say, well, I didn't read the rules, I'm sorry, don't delete my account. It doesn't work that way. Those companies will still delete your account and say you should have read those rules. And relatedly, I know a lot of people use images created by others. That's just the nature of social media and the internet that we're frequently sharing. And I know news organizations frequently do this with citizen journalism, where someone will take a picture of an accident or a natural disaster, and the news agency will say, may we use that image? And they wait for that person to give permission. And make sure that you always do that. And if somebody asks you to take it down, right? Don't be ignorant of other people's wishes. All right, the fifth deadly sin is what we might just quite simply call monotony, doing the same thing over and over again. And what we see a lot with people's pages, especially as they're growing their sites, they just keep saying, like us, please like us, like our page. Yep. To counter that, you shouldn't have to even say that, right? You should just be producing creative, inspirational, original content that will get them to like you, right? If you're asking somebody to like you, chances are they're not really going to like you. All right, this sin is always interesting to me. It's called narcissism. And really it relates to the way in which we are really focused on getting followers. And some of the things that people do in terms of trying to help get extra attention to their content is artificially inflating those numbers. And this is an image I always share with my American students, and they're just amazed by it, that there have been vending machines in Russia that you can buy Instagram followers, right? And quite simply, don't do it. And here's why. I've worked with a number of companies that have bought Twitter followers and that have bought Instagram followers, and those are meaningless accounts, right? And they're usually associated with things that you wouldn't want to be associated with. So, for example, I worked with a cancer research company that bought followers and was trying to promote their research methods at a conference. And it was getting retweeted by people wearing lingerie and skimpy underwear, and it was getting retweeted by people with lots of tattoos. So it wasn't their target audience. It didn't look right? And so, again, that's just a major problem if you think you can buy followers who will help you out. You want a genuine audience that matches your interests. And then finally, one of the last things that is considered one of these deadly sins is what we call cross-posting. A lot of people will post something to Facebook and say, oh, I better get it up on Twitter, so they just hit post to Twitter too, and they don't change anything. And so what somebody might see is the exact same post across every single social media platform that they use. And the problem with that is every platform has its own kind of unstated rules. It has its own best practices and things that are polite and normal. And so you have to take care to edit for each different platform that you're working with. All right, so that's content. Let's think now about evaluating your connections themselves. So moving here a moment to your own social network, those that you're connected with. There are ways that we can think about this relationship, and so this chart can help you through that process. We might think of connections and relationships in one of two ways, right? So we can have the volume, or the number of connections, which you can see are many to few, and then we can also have the intensity of those relationships. Are they very strong relationships, or are they weak relationships? And as we look at this chart, really it's about measuring where you are, and then also saying where do you want to be based on your business and your communication goals. So let's look at some examples here. So you can see there are 4 squares right in there, right? That say abundant and deep, shallow, and simplistic. So here's examples of ways we might think about that. If we have few very strong connections, this shows that we have the possibility for deep relationships with our followers, right? It might be, I have a Facebook page and only my closest friends follow it, and we're always communicating in that space, right? That'd be an example of few strong connections. On the other hand, we might have many weak connections, right? I might have tens of thousands of followers, but I don't know any of those people, and they casually interact. Those are huge audiences, but very shallow relationships, right? And not that there's anything wrong with either of these, but we have to make sure that they're connected with our overall strategy. So the 2 questions we might ask then are, how would these kinds of connections maybe change our content strategy? Or if I know that I want something different, let's say that I want many strong connections, right? What would I need to do differently? Would I need to be posting more? Do I need to spend time engaging with everyone, right? So that's going to make a big difference for our overall strategy. All right, the next recommendation and the next step is thinking about analytics, right? And those are the data that are provided by social media platforms, and those are also things that you can, or sets of tools that you can use to go out and maybe conduct some research on other platforms. So one of the top recommendations I make for my students is to go into Facebook, especially if you manage a page. There are what are called insights that are available. And you can download those, you can report on those. And what you're seeing really is just the kinds of interactions and the audiences that you're reaching. And what I recommend is that you save those, that you report on them, that you have a sense of how things are changing over time. And I usually tell my students is put that all into one big Microsoft Excel spreadsheet and save it for later, because at some point you may leave that account. You may, if you're doing it for school or if you're doing it as a volunteer project, you may not have access to that always. And someday a potential employer may look at that and say, hey, wow, this person knows what they're doing. Or this person can demonstrate that they know how to manage and grow a social media account. So in terms of analytics, here are things that you should be thinking about and looking at. And so first, we're thinking about things like impressions. So Facebook and Instagram will measure how many times your post has showed up in someone's timeline. Second, Facebook especially will measure something called reach, which they'll show you the number of unique individuals that your posts are able to reach. So not simply how many times it's showing up, but those unique numbers out there. And then third and fourth, they'll show you the engagements, the kinds of things that happen on your posts. And this is more than just the likes and more than just the shares, especially Facebook, as we'll see here in just a moment. And Twitter will actually break down all of the kinds of interactions, the clicks, the types of clicks, whether people are watching your videos, all of that is available. And then finally, one of the things you might also think about is measuring the rate of engagement. There are a number of different ways to measure this, but in the most basic level, we just think of the percentage of impressions that yield engagements. So in other words, the number of impressions divided by, the other way around, the engagements divided by the impressions, and that will give us a percentage, right? So those are all things you can be tracking for every single post, and something that you can then put into a spreadsheet and look at over a period of time to gauge whether or not you're succeeding. So here's an example of what you might see in Facebook Insights. I'm not sure if any of you are managing pages and have seen anything like this before, but what you can get a sense of, again, is it will calculate the number of people that are seeing your posts and the different kinds of engagements that are happening. So I can look at that really quickly, and I can automatically know which one is my best post for this, this month, right? And again, that's something I want to save and report on and share with others so that they know how well I'm doing. And Twitter analytics is very, very similar. Right there I can see I've got impressions and engagements and that engagement rate. And I also mentioned that especially sites like Twitter will sometimes break down the different kinds of engagements. So you can see right there, in addition to impressions and the totals, I can see that there are media engagements and there are likes, profile clicks, replies. So there's lots of levels that might be available depending on the platform that you're working with. And again, the reason we're collecting these analytics, it's not just to show somebody down the road and say, look what a great job I did. This should go back into your strategy, right? So you need to be able to say, what changes am I seeing over time? Am I getting more engagements? Am I getting more impressions? Am I getting a larger reach over time? Are these things helping me meet my goals? So you have to think all the way back to that first question. What were my goals? What were my business goals? What were my communication goals? And do I need to change things appropriately in terms of maybe content or how often I post? So again, those analytics need to always go back to that strategy. Another way you can think about analytics is that you can do research. One of the ways I describe this to my students is that you can kind of creep on other people who are using social media to figure out what they're doing. So a couple ways that might operate. The first is competitive analysis, right? Just looking at what others are doing and saying, how do I compare? Right? In some cases, that's also called benchmarking. You might look at what is their baseline of operation? What is their averages? And how well do I compare to their averages? You might also do work reverse engineering what they do, right? If you follow somebody else in Facebook and you kind of keep tabs and you count how many likes, how many shares, how many comments that they get, and you keep track of that, right? You can kind of look at that over time and say, well, I see right there, it's all their video posts. Maybe I can be using video too. And again, I'm sorry, I know none of you use Twitter, right? But here's a great example of a tool that I will teach my students. It's called Twitonomy, and it allows me to actually log into the site, and I can search any public Twitter profile. And it's actually an amazing site because it will look at the most recent tweets and give me a large number of metrics such as the number of tweets per day that are created, the percentage of tweets that get retweeted, how many times they get retweeted, the number of hashtags that they use. So it's kind of an amazing way to get a sense of the performance of other people's accounts. And we can even see things like the days of the week that they post, the hours of the day that they post, how they post, whether they're using an iPhone or an Android device, or if they're using maybe a web service instead to post. So it can be a fascinating way to, again, reverse engineer what someone else is doing. All right, so in addition to analytics, we also have policy, right? And this is a very important step because policy, again, kind of set the rules and they set a sense of who is responsible for what. And so the first way we can do policy is through the roles and assign different kinds of roles. And here are the 4 roles that I often recommend my students identify ahead of time. Administrators, who are kind of in charge of the account overall. They get to be the people who define the other roles for everybody else. We have editors who need to be in charge of content and to make sure that the content that is getting created and posted meets your goals overall. You should have authors, and if, again, you are running a journalistic operation, this would be all of your reporters, right? So people who are actually creating content. And then finally, you should have somebody responsible for the analytics, right? So for posting and studying and analyzing everything that's happening. And the biggest question, of course, will be, how are you going to train future people as well? So here's an example, really briefly, of how those roles might operate for a university newspaper. So I sat down with my campus paper at Illinois State University, and I worked through that team with the following. First, we looked for the administrator, and basically we decided that should be a professor or a faculty member. Right? And the reason we did that is it needs to be somebody who will be with the account for a long time, right? Because that person's going to be in charge and making sure that things happen on that page. For the editor, we decided that should be the overall editor of the newspaper because it's a very similar job, right? They're making sure that the content is appropriate to the goals and the vision of the paper. And then the author, as I mentioned before, those are all of our reporters. And then the analyst was actually an interesting moment because at first we thought that it should be the editor because that person was making many of the decisions. But then we realized that the editor was too busy, really too busy to do that. So we brought in the business managers, the people who were doing advertising and sales, because they actually already had those number skills in terms of reporting on the success of advertisements. So we made those business managers then the analysts, right? So that's just an example of how you might define roles. And sometimes you may be the only one doing that, but you have to realize that you're going to do each of those different things to help sustain your page. All right, a little bit more content or policy here. You should also be thinking about content overall, right? So in terms of what you're creating, should also have rules around it. And one of the first things you can do, especially if you have other people working with you, is to create what's called a style guide, where you approve things like the fonts, the colors that you use. If you have logos, what does that logo look like? What are the appropriate rules for using it? In terms of overall content, you should also come up with rules for what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. Because sometimes, especially when you have individuals running these accounts, they're going to make decisions without you there, and you don't want maybe personal opinions to maybe undermine what you're trying to do with your account. And those of you who use hashtags, make sure that you're setting policy to say, here are our official hashtags. I've worked with organizations before in the past that have a hard time with hashtags because they either make them too long, too specific, or in some cases, even simple rules like if they're using dates. I worked with an academic organization that runs a conference every year. And they used to use the name of their conference and then the date or the year, 2019 or something like that. And everybody at the conference didn't use the 2019, they all just used 19. And so they weren't tracking their hashtag very effectively then. They didn't think they had the numbers that they did. So it's very important that you set policy and say, here is what we will do. And then finally, just thinking about the overall tone and the voice of your account, right? Are you going to be humorous? Are you going to have a personal voice? Or are you going to be more objective, right? Those are all things that you can set in your policy. And then the next thing that you can do is go back to everything that we've been talking about and actually create what we call an editorial calendar. I'll walk through this. I'm not going to explain every single one of these. But what this helps you do is plan out all of your posts. So if you are an editor, and if you are the person who is, again, responsible for the content of a page, it helps to sit down with your authors and to spell this all out. And to do that, here's a tool. It's called an editorial calendar. And here's what that might look like, right? We start with a date, so when you plan to post, maybe the time of day that you plan to post. The type of content, right? We talked about form and genre, right? Maybe we've got genre. I talked about like an inspirational video right there. We have to choose our channel because we might be running multiple social media accounts. And so is it going to go to Facebook? Is it going to go to our Instagram account? You should really title everything. Even though maybe not every social media platform says you have to create a title for that post. It will help you down the road if you are trying to go back and say, oh, what were we doing? What was the name of that again, right? Include the full text, just so you know what it was that you posted. In some cases, I tell students, even if you have the space or the ability to maybe write the name of the image that you used, or the file name of that image. Give a description, just in case you lose access to that image, right? So I just say, like, here's what was in the video. And then make sure, especially if you're working with multiple people, put the name of the author in there. And I wrote Reggie Redbird, that's our mascot at Illinois State University. But those authors are important, so who is assigned to that post? And then finally, I always provide a number of columns, a suggested number of columns to report your analytics. So that way you can already start the assessment. So later, when you have maybe completed those posts, you can go back and look at how well they performed. And with this content calendar, this is something that I will share with your faculty members. So that's something that you can all have access to in a spreadsheet format. So that way you don't have to try to recreate this out there on your own. All right, so we've talked now about the overall strategy. And here are just some tools that I recommend for both creating content and publishing content. Because you may not always have access to maybe something like the Adobe Creative Cloud. Here are some examples of free or very low-cost tools that you can go out and use on your own. The first that I recommend, that I've had a lot of success with my students, is called Canva. And what it allows you to do, especially with a free account, is create graphics that are usually very trendy, that it provides tools to help you design them very easily. They always look nice. And then it makes them so that they fit the perfect formats of social media platforms. And so you can very easily create an image or a background image for a Facebook post. Another source that I recommend is called Adobe Spark. And as far as I know, at least in the United States, it's free for anyone with an educational email address. That may be the case for you too. You can try it out and see. But what I like about it is it has many of the features of Canva, but it also allows you to create short videos. And short videos that are really made for the social web, that just involve images and allow you to add sound. And I would have brought an example of student videos, but for some reason I forgot them at home, so they're not here at the moment. And in terms of publishing content, I think a lot of people don't realize that Facebook has created a tool called Facebook Creator that allows you to do a lot of this management work that we've already been talking about, especially in terms of scheduling your content. So that way you can go in and you can create the post, you can have authors have everything ready to go, and then an editor can go in later and approve and actually push that post out there. Or the editor can also schedule that post by assigning it a date that it will go out. There are also a number of other management tools that are available. Many of them have free or trial accounts that are available. And one of those that I frequently recommend is called Hootsuite because it allows multiple platforms. So you can publish to Facebook, I think LinkedIn, maybe Instagram, and it allows you to schedule all of them, which is really, really convenient. And again, each one of these may have a free or low-cost trial available as well. And many people say, well, why bother with one of those? I can just post myself. It's pretty easy to go in. So I want to provide a brief anecdote, a short story about why it's really important to do these publishing tools. So if you have many people who are working with your social media accounts, you have the possibility of what's called rogue posting or rogue tweeting, right? And this is an example that came from the American Red Cross a number of years ago. And I'll just summarize really briefly. The first post here says, from the American Red Cross, official Twitter account, right? It says, hey, Ryan found more beer in the back of the fridge. We're getting drunk tonight. No? And again, that was through the official American Red Cross site. The person who was responsible for posting accidentally thought she was on her own personal Twitter account. Right? So she had to post then saying, okay, we deleted that rogue tweet, rest assured, the American Red Cross is sober, and we took away the keys, right? And fortunately for this person, she didn't get into any trouble, and they actually were able to work out the situation. It was very funny. But had she been using and working successfully with one of these management platforms, she would have scheduled ahead of time. She wouldn't have been logged in with her personal account accidentally. And so those tools help avoid this kind of accidental posting. All right, so finally, I just want to give you a sense of what we've been doing at Illinois State in terms of client projects and really how they help the educational process. And the basic idea, of course, is that we try to pair our students up with organizations. So these are probably like nonprofit social service groups, like animal shelters or museums, or small businesses, which really helps them go through the process of creating social media plans. And so when I teach these client projects, here are the steps, and these should look pretty familiar, right? We already walked through those 6 steps. And so I have my students go and meet with the clients. They sit down and they work with clients to say, what are your goals? And you wouldn't believe how painful that is for clients. They hate trying to figure that out. But it's so important because they don't always know what they want, right? I have students do research, right? When I talked about analytics, I have students go out and think about those clients' competitors. And they go out and they analyze those competitors and provide research to say, here's some possibilities for things you might do. I have students then go through the process of creating the plan and the sample editorial calendar. I have them write policy, and then I have them present this all to clients at the end of the year. And what's amazing is in many cases, our students end up getting either internships or jobs with these organizations that they've been paired up with. So it's a really important process. And what I encourage you to do as a student is to think about places and organizations you might volunteer for and practice the creation of social media strategy and planning. And for faculty members, if you know of organizations or if you have contacts in industry to maybe help find ways to pair students up so that they can do this creation of social media plans. And here are just a couple examples again of the ideal clients that we've worked with in the past. So small businesses, especially those that do not have social media experience, can benefit from students working on their social media strategy. Social organizations like animal shelters, maybe hospitals, groups for the homeless or people who need help with maybe mental services, right? Museums love having students help because museums' missions are education, right? And if you are a student, that helps meet their goals as well. And sometimes local government agencies or university departments also need help with social media pages. And they're very good resources that we have found at Illinois State University for helping our students. So with that, I will just show you really quickly the 2 books that I use in my classes on social media strategy. Much of the content tonight has been adapted from the Philip Clampett Social Media Strategy book, the blue one up there on the left. And then I also recommend a new book that's come out, and again, these are both in English, but on social media for strategic communication, that takes a much more holistic and large-scale approach to everything that we've seen here tonight. So with that, I thank you very much for listening. I know that's a lot to throw at you at once. I will make this presentation available so that you can go back and review it. And again, normally when I teach this is over the course of 16 weeks. And so you've got 16 weeks of content in 1 hour. And if your brain is tired, I don't blame you. So thank you very much. And I will be happy to open it up for questions.
მე მგონი ძალიან საინტერესო იყო და თან საჭირო, იმიტომ რომ მე მგონი რაღაცაზე დავფიქრდებით, როდესაც სტრატეგიული კომუნიკაციის დაგეგმვას დავაპირებთ და ბევრი კითხვაც გაჩნდა ალბათ. მე დამავიწყა თავში მე თქვა, რომ ჩვენი ძვირფასი პროფესორის სტუმრობა არის ნაწილი უფრო დიდი პროგრამის, რომელსაც ამერიკის შეერთებული შტატების საელჩო უჭერს მხარს, ეს არის თანამშრომლობა უნივერსიტეტებს შორის. საქართველოს რამდენიმე უნივერსიტეტი იღებს მონაწილეობას აი ამ პროგრამაში და ილიას უნივერსიტეტი არის ერთ-ერთი. და აქვე ძალიან დიდი მადლობა მინდა გადავუხადო ქალბატონ სოფოს, რომელიც არის ესე იგი საფუძველში აი ამ პარტნიორობის, რომელიც ძალიან დაგვეხმარა უნივერსიტეტებს გაგვერკვია ჩვენი ფუნქცია და საჭიროებები, რა შეიძლებოდა რომ გაგვაკეთებინა ამერიკულ უნივერსიტეტებთან და ასევე ძალიან დიდი მადლობა ქალბატონ დენის, რომელიც არის დეპოლის ჩვენი ამერიკელი პარტნიორის უნივერსიტეტიდან პრეზიდენტის სპეციალური კონსულტანტი არის, რომელიც ასევე გვეხმარება აი ამ პარტნიორობის აწყობაში, ასე რომ თქვენც მინდა რომ ესე იგი მადლობა გადავუხადოთ ქალბატონ სოფოს და ქალბატონ დენის. ეხლა შეგვიძლია გადავიდეთ კითხვებზე, იმიტომ რომ რამდენიმე ძალიან საინტერესო თემას შეეხო და თქვენთვის ალბათ ძალიან ნაცნობს, ხო? განსაკუთრებით როცა ჩამოთვალა ეს 7 საკითხი, რომელიც შეიძლება სოციალურ მედიასთან იყოს დაკავშირებული. ალბათ ჩვენს მომხვედრილვართ ისეთ ხაფანგებში, როგორიც არის კლიბაიტებისთვის ნადირობა, ხო? დაგუჭერია რაღაცეებზე ხელი და ამორჩენილვართ რაღაცა სისულელე ინფორმაციის კითხვის პროცესში, ხო? რაღაც გამოცდილებები გვაქვს. აბა, კითხვები? კომენტარი შეიძლება თქვენი მაგალითები შეიძლება.
მოგესალმებით. მადლობა ცენტრის ლექციისთვის. ჩემი კითხვა პრინციპში ცოტათი პრეზენტაციას გაცდება, სხვა ტიპის კითხვა მექნება. მე მაინტერესებს რამდენად არის საპროგრამებული ამერიკულ უნივერსიტეტებში, ასე ვთქვათ, მედიაციგნიერების კურსები, იმიტომ რომ ჩვენთან საქართველოში განსაკუთრებით პრობლემური არის იმ მედიისგან ინფორმაციის მიღება, რომელიც ძალიან ჩვენ ეთქუება ხოლმე, ქმნის ასე ვთქვათ fake news და ზოგადად მოსაბჭოთა ქვეყნებში გვაქვს ეს პრობლემები და ამ მართლობით თუ გაქვს რაიმე პრაქტიკა გამოსულა, რომელსაც გავიზიარებთ. მადლობა.
Well, in the United States, we face a very similar situation. And again, that phrase fake news is something that we hear all the time, especially in the social web. So in terms of practices that we engage in, I think first and foremost, I'm sure and I hope you're all aware of sites like Myth Detector, which I know is something that is exclusive to Georgia. We have similar sites in the United States that we try to steer our populations towards, to say, look for some of these common problems and some of these posts that are trying to deliberately spread misinformation. In terms of everyday people, they tend not to want to slow down, to take that time to go read those other sites and read those other pages. And so when we're trying to teach critical media literacy, we've had some authors in the United States try to teach some certain sequences and certain practices of doing assessment. So there's one called the 4 steps approach that is often taught. And the first step is slowing down. So basically saying, is this post making me feel a certain way? Especially if I feel extremely angry when I read something, or if it's making me feel upset at somebody else, that's usually a good indication that it may be some sort of misinformation or disinformation attempt. And so that should be the first signal. The second step then is to, if I'm remembering this correctly, is to start backtracking and looking for the original source. And that's where a lot of people, again, don't want to take the time, but we're trying to teach our students that if you feel strongly, you need to slow down and then start to backtrack and find the original content. And if that's not possible, that should already lead you to additional steps, which are talk to other people and begin to verify, right? And to say, have you seen this? Where else have you seen this? And then finally, the last step, I believe, is doing basically reporting it, to say to other people, I've discovered that this is a problem, don't fall for it either, right? So we've been trying to teach methods like that. One of the biggest problems that we do experience, of course, is that it's hard to go through all those with every single thing that you see every day. But that's a very good question. And again, there are many resources. I want to highlight again mythdetector.ge, which should be something you are all acquainted with and familiar with. And again, even practices like those 4 steps are things that you can just start doing. You know, that sense of slowing down, going back to the source, verifying with others, and then telling everyone that it is a problem.
I'd like to add something to that. In addition to the type of fake news that Dr. Carpenter just mentioned, there's also another definition of fake news in the United States, and politicians are using it to define news they don't like. So there's a difference between stories that are untrue and stories that people, politicians generally who are in power, don't like. And that is confusing the issue a lot in the United States.
მე მგონი გვეცნო, ხო, ეს ამბავი ჩვენთანაც ძალიან ისეთი აქტუალურია, ხო, როდესაც პოლიტიკოსები fake news ეძახიან იმას, რაც არ მოწონთ ხოლმე.
გაურჯობთ, მე ვარ ნიკოლოზ ნათინაძე. მადლობა ამ სასარგებლო და პროდუქტიული ლექციისთვის. და მაინტერესებს ძირითადად რა სახის გამოწვევებს აწყობენ უნივერსიტეტები, როდესაც ცდილობენ სოციალური მედიის სტრატეგიის თუ სტრუქტურის დანერგვას შიდა საუნივერსიტეტო სივრცეში და როგორია შემდგომი სტუდენტების ჩართულობა ამერიკულ უნივერსიტეტებში და დაინტერესება ამაზე. მადლობა.
And just to clarify, you're thinking about universities and how they use social media strategy?
What kind of challenges does university come across when they are trying to develop social media in university studies?
Oh, in our studies.
Yes.
So not just universities doing recruitment, trying to get students to come. Oh, yes. So in terms of teaching strategy, yes. So the biggest difficulty, I think, for my classes is that it takes so much time, right? Usually I get one class to teach it, and from beginning to end, if we only have a 16-week class, it's very hard for my students to assess their entire plan, which may last for a client for a number of months or years after that. So students don't always get to learn what works best in terms of that time that they would be spending. So many cases where we have to be experimental, or again, just give them the ability to do the planning, to spend time going through the motions, and then from there, what we hope is that giving them experience through, again, internships, or giving them experience will help them down the road. I think other challenges that we run into in terms of strategy really is figuring out which courses that we're going to teach strategy in. I would love to see it done more in journalism classes. Right now, it's primarily taught in public relations. And as I mentioned at the very beginning of the presentation, where we're seeing some of the biggest struggles is with journalists. And they're many of the ones who are doing the most important work right now in social media. So perhaps there may be ways for us to maybe rewrite the book and do a different book for social media for journalists themselves. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
მე ვარ ბაჩანოვარგიანი, მადლობა, საკმაოდ საინტერესო პრეზენტაცია იყო. ჩემი კითხვა გამომდინარეობს უკვე პირველი კითხვიდან, რომელიც დაისვა. ხშირად სოციალური მედია პოლიტიკური პარტიების იარაღით ხდება ხოლმე სამწუხაროდ და ჩემი პირადი აზრი არის, რომ საკანონმდებლო ორგანო მაქსიმალურად უნდა აღკვეთოს აღნიშნული ფაქტი და უბრალოდ მაინტერესებს შედარებით უფრო კომპეტენტური პირებისგან რას ფიქრობენ აღნიშნულ საკითხზე. სოციალური მედია გადახედის ინფორმაციისა და პოლიტიკური შეფასებების პროპაგანდისთვის.
Yeah, so in terms of regulation or laws that can be put in place to prevent propaganda, in the United States it's very difficult because we have laws about free speech. So in terms of the legislative level, we really can't legislate that. We do have occasional hate speech rules and laws that may allow us to have something taken down or challenged in court here and there. We do have libel laws, and I know you're a journalist, so I may have to pass it to you in a moment too. But there are some rules, but in terms of creating new ones, we are really bound by our Bill of Rights and our First Amendment that says we have free speech. That said, what is very interesting is that social media platforms are private companies, and they actually get the last say in what can be posted and what can't be, because they own the space, right? And at least in the United States, free speech means that you can't be arrested for what you say or believe and talk about, unless you're causing direct harm, but that's a different story. And so social media platforms, again, have the last say. They own the space. It's not really the public, even though they operate like a public space. So many of the things that we are seeing right now, a lot of the struggles are people trying to call upon social media platforms to say, you need to make rules. But their interests are profit-driven first. And so they thrive on propaganda, right? Like propaganda makes money for Facebook, right? So it's not in their best interest to make rules about speech, right? So that's going to be a problem. And I don't know in the United States the best way to approach that, other than that we need to start challenging the power of Facebook, because it's so big. We're hearing right now calls from people who are running for president to break up Facebook, to turn it into a number of smaller companies for whom that might make a bigger difference, right? So maybe to answer your question, in terms of legislation, I don't think we can make anything that says you can't speak these things or post that propaganda, but we can challenge the companies to make better policies about what can be created.
კითხვა რამდენად მაქვს არ ვიცი. შეიძლება კითხვა ჩაითვალოს, თუმცა იქ იყო წესები ჩამოთვლილი, მაგალითად არ ვიყო როგორები არ უნდა ვიყოთ სოციალურ მედიაში. და ერთ-ერთი იყო ნაციზმი, იგნორი, მაგალითად განძღვა და ასე შემდეგ. თუმცა მინდა ავახსენო, საქართველოს ძალიან წარმატებით მუშაობს ესეთი სტილი, მეც ერთ-ერთი გვერდი მაქვს ეგეთი ნაციზმის სტილით და ასევე მაგალითად მოლოყვანილი ყველას ეცოდინება, როდესაც პირდაპირ იგინება კომპანია, რომელიც აგინებს რუსეთის მთავრობას და ასე შემდეგ. და როდესაც აუდიტორია არის ისეთი მიმღები ამის მიმართ, მაშინ შეიძლება ამ ყველაფერი უარყოფითმა პირიქით ძალიან დადებითად იგუშავს. თუმცა ბიზნესში ვინც აპირებთ, ამას მაინც არ გირჩევთ. Გავსი პრაქტიკა თუ გავს თქვენს, როდესაც მსგავსი ტიპის პროექტები ძალიან კარგად მუშაობს პირიქით.
Oh, absolutely. So sites like that work really well, right? They're extremely effective, right? Everybody will click on them. Everybody will engage. But the question for you is that good for you and your goals? Is getting attention always the best thing for you, right? So it's a very good point that yes, it's effective, but it's probably not best for your own plan. Yeah, unless your goal is to just constantly create outrage and make everybody angry.
chat ან კომენტარის გაკეთება ხარ უნდა არა? მაშინ ძალიან დიდი მადლობა იმისთვის რომ ყავით. ძალიან დიდი მადლობა ჩვენს